What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast. This is episode 101. Woo! Or episode 57, depending on how you number things and look at it.
Everybody gets a Dalmatian today.
Everyone. And today we're talking about the seasons of life. I'm Danny. I'm here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Danny. I think this is a good topic because no matter where you are and no matter what you're dealing with, there's always kind of seasonality. Nothing is permanent. Like we were talking about what should we talk about, and you brought up the kind of like getting stuck in the middle of something. Well, in the middle is just between the beginning and the end. So kind of like you see the seasons coming and going. So let's talk about it.
Wait, and all right. So you know what's funny, and this is what gets me about it, right? Is like the beginning of stuff is so fun. And I don't care what you're talking about. It could be like, a new job, relationship, romantic or otherwise, right? It's like there's so much fun and excitement in the beginning, a new hobby, new whatever. But then, the reality sets in that it's like you hit that middle point. It's just like exercise, right? You start out, you're really weak. You start getting stronger and you feel great. And you're like, yeah, but you always hit plateaus. There's always a part in the middle where you have to kind of just get through it. You have to maintain. And then eventually you hit another side of that. And I think life is like that a lot of times where like, you feel really good. You're making this development in your life. Things are going better. But then you hit these points and it's like, why is this taking so long? Time becomes like this enemy. Endings, I'm not so sure about. I'm not sure how I feel about that yet. But,
I think some endings are great.
Like
especially in the bedroom.
Yeah, those are nice. And they're really, naturally good, you might even say. And then, so some are good, but I think they're also like, there is that sort of like bittersweet quality to them too sometimes, where it's like you reach a goal, right? You celebrate, and then it's like, now what? And you feel like you're either back at square one or you're kind of like back in that middle. So yeah, I don't know. It's an odd thing.
Yeah. But I think the two things that come most to my mind is one is this too shall pass. And two is that, spring always follows winter. So like those two things I always find helpful because there are always these moments in life. And usually it's during the uncomfortable moments when I want it, when I want it to be different. I want it to change. And it's during those moments that I remind myself this too shall pass. So like nothing's permanent. And then every year, no matter what, spring always comes after winter. Like as brutal as winter is, as cold and as gloomy as it is, spring always comes after that. You know what happens in spring? The flowers start blooming, the birds and the bees and all that fun stuff. Yeah. So like those things definitely help me with the seasonality of life because every difficulty that I've ever been through, and I'm going to speculate every difficulty that everyone's ever been through, you got through it. Like it wasn't comfortable. Yeah. It wasn't fun. You may be dealing with some of it even now, but you get through it. But I think the difficulty lies in being uncomfortable during it.
Well, and being able to be uncomfortable, right? And dealing with that. And then also it's funny too, because I think part of it is also that reality, like, that you've gotten through it before. You've also known that you've been in these situations before. And it's like, even with that knowledge, it still happens. You know what I mean? It's like there's no escaping in a certain sense. And I think that's also part of where like sometimes maybe the frustration comes in because, we have these expectations of things, or we can imagine something and we want it now. We don't want to wait. Everything has gotten so quick. And I always wonder, actually, this is just totally like, well, it's on topic, I guess. I always wonder if it was easier to wait like 150, 200 years ago when like there wasn't so much immediate things, where like you kind of knew like, okay, the crop's going to take 6 months or 4 months or whatever, I don't know how long they take, but you know what I mean? Like, this, like their timeline was very different. So I wonder if like there was still that frustration.
Yeah. I'm going to guess that they still went through a lot of this stuff, but I'm going to also guess that the time frame was completely different. Because I think back to our childhood, and it was like a totally different world. I mean, like we had answering machines. So like you leave a message for someone, and if they get it days later and call you back, awesome. And it's just like there wasn't the impetus that things need to be done now. So I also remember, and maybe it was because I was a child, but I also remember like sometimes my day was just sitting in my room and seeing what I could find and just going through
Yeah.
that stuff and not having to deal with all the things to do.
That is the funny thing when you think back to it's like, is it because you were younger? Is it that a misconception of that? Because it's a totally, there's less responsibility and stuff. But I remember that too. It's funny, like not having cell phones, just leaving your house, and literally no one could get in touch with you for like 8 hours, 10 hours. And you come back and it's like, hey, it's like this wasn't this immediacy of like, you have to be there, you have to answer, you have to respond. I think that does kind of, that expectation of now does screw us up a lot, especially with, growth and development, because it's like at the same time I know it's like a lifelong thing. I mean, all these philosophers who I admire, everybody I admire, actually all the biographies I read, it wasn't like they were 30 and they were like, I'm done, I don't need to do anything else anymore, I'm perfect, good, right? It's like you keep going no matter what, so it doesn't stop.
But the cool thing is that like you gain experience and you gain these like points
Yeah.
of view. So like we talk about difficulties and people getting through difficulties. And one thing that I heard last week or so was that actually journaling about difficulties you've been through helps you process them, helps you deal more effectively with them in the future. So I've been just experimenting with this on my own. And it actually is like really I find it really beneficial because I get to find like the little nuggets of gold in those terrible things. Like I can remember almost viscerally how bad it was, but then I can be like, but yeah, because it went this way, like look what happened now. Like I didn't see it then, but look what happened. So now if I encounter something similar to that, I could be like, yeah, I may not feel it now, but there's a potential that something could happen.
I like that because it's like, so you mean, I'm assuming you mean, right? Like, so actually journaling out the story of what happened as you
Yep.
remember
Writing
it,
the
and
story
then kind
about
of
what
exploring.
happened.
Yeah.
Woe is me. Poor
Okay.
me. This is terrible.
Oh, geez.
But this is how it turned out. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that too because it kind of reminds you like Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, that reminder that, everything that the person we are now is a consequence of our entire past, right? And everything that happened before us. So, like, because you are who you are now, you needed your whole past, all your past experiences, all those things that happen. And so I like what he says is like part of like affirming life is affirming now. Because once you do, you affirm everything else. And it's about looking back and finding those nuggets and finding those things that like, kind of justify, oh, yeah, that might have been hard, but because of it, I am me now. And that's great. So I shouldn't, be negative about it. Yeah, it's funny too, because I also know like, you see it so often where people talk about like some of the worst things in their lives being the best, like later on. But it's only with that perspective of later that they realize that it made them stronger. It gave them the ability to do this or that, right? And because of it, they're now a better person. I think that's also something that you got to keep in mind that like sometimes I try and tell myself too, like, well, in 5 years, how will I look at this? Or in 10 years, what will my perspective be? Will it be the same or different? Probably different. I'll probably look at it and laugh, or I'll probably look at it and be like, thank God I went through that.
Yeah. Because like a lot of the most painful things are really just opportunities for us to learn. And we learn the
Yeah.
quickest when it's painful. And so like
Yeah.
people don't want to make mistakes, but really those mistakes are learning opportunities. And so, you know, we get to learn from them. And even the challenging experiences, we develop compassion and we can see things through other people's eyes. Like when they go, like just the pain that you have to go through sometimes in life, you're like, wow, I mean, when people are in pain, like I want to help them because I've been in pain too, and I know what that's like. And like it develops that in you where you wouldn't have that sensory acuity if you didn't go through it yourself.
It's funny. I don't know why. I was thinking about this. We could totally make like 100 episodes bashing the education system. But, I do think, because I was just thinking about that. I think that's part of it too, is like, we don't learn at an early age to think of these things this way. We don't learn to learn on our own. And you're right, though. I think those are the moments where we do learn the most about ourselves and about what we're capable of, and about how to get through things. And I think, that's a really healthy way of looking at it, that, it's also a way for me to empathize with others, for me to see, kind of more from their shoes. If they're struggling with something, if I think back to the times when I was in pain, I should want to help them, right? I should want to be a better person and change that world, which I like that. Good way to,
Mm-hmm.
good way to kind of frame it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like another thing that I've done that's kind of helped me out a little bit, because I like to share helpful things for people, is just like trusting that I'm guided. in a way, and trusting that I will always take the right path, and then trusting that there's always a way. So like that helps me get through these difficult times, because like while I'm in it, I can't see it. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. And unfortunately, when you're in it, you just can't see it. But like
Yeah.
trusting that your direction, that number one, you're guided, but also that you will always take the right path, and there is always a way to get through it. And that is just like really helpful for those difficult times.
Do you mean like, so in that sense of trusting, like, are you putting your faith in something, or are you just trusting the fact that, like, because like, yeah, the point you're making, I think, is going like, Camus talks about in Sisyphus, like we look back on our lives and we interpret the things that happened to explain now. So we connect those dots. We do. They don't necessarily even need to be related, but we make that story.
Mhm.
So are you telling yourself that like you're trusting that you'll make sense of it later, or is it a trust in some other thing, or what
No,
do you,
so
how do
like
you
me
sort of describe
personally,
that?
I trust something bigger than me. And so like
Okay.
I trust that I am always guided by this. But I also believe that I will always take the right turn in the road.
Okay.
So like I think there's something bigger than me that's guiding me, but I also think when it comes down to me making a decision, I'm always going to choose the right way to go.
I like that. Yeah. Kind of just bolstering your confidence in it, right? Saying that, like, don't be afraid, just go because it's right, it's correct. There's a string there that I'm following in the path and they'll help me.
Mhm.
It's funny. I think that's a big part of it too, is like, I, at least personally, I found when I feel the most stuck in the middle, it's like when I feel like I don't have, like, I know the path, but it's not clear. It might be covered with like leaves or something, it's like, so it's hard to see, and it's not certain, like, which direction you should go. And I think that's the hardest part sometimes, because like then you think about the timeline and you're like, damn, like if this sped up a little bit, maybe I'd know. But it's like you feel like you're just kind of in the woods.
Dude, I'm right there with you right now. So like we always
Yeah.
talk about our own personal stuff. So like, dude, me like pursuing uh educating myself about computers. Like it's I know where I am now so much better than where I was, 6, 9 months
Yeah.
ago. But it's still like I'm in the middle and I kind of know the direction I want to go. And every day I just kind of go a little bit more in that direction. But it's like, when am I like, when am I going to get there, get some headway, get something? And it's just like being stuck in this middle that's somewhat uncomfortable, because I'm like, will it come to fruition? Is something going to come out of
Well,
this?
and that's the worry too, right? It's like you know that, like, if you just keep going and keep doing it, you'll keep making progress, and eventually there will be clarity on that path. But there's also that like nagging fear of like, oh shit, what if it's like wrong? Like, what if this isn't right? Because it's like anything else. When you start something new, it's exciting, but like that doesn't mean you're going to necessarily love it. Actually doing it for real, when you're doing it, in depth and trying to understand these things, you might not like that type of work or something, especially with like jobs. So there's that fear that like, oh God, what if this is wrong? And I think the only way sometimes is just to keep going and reminding yourself too, like, well, at least I'm still developing a lot of skills. I'm getting new experiences. That's going to help. So at least I can leverage that later in the future, even if this doesn't pan out. But yeah, it's a
Mhm.
tough position to be in, though. It is. It's like, I feel that way about so many things sometimes in life, because it's, you want to see that it's almost like you want to see the fruition of your choices. You want to see that now, so you know that it's right. It's almost like you want a guarantee, but there's no guarantees. And that's the problem. Even if you do everything right, it might not work out. And that's not necessarily a problem with you. It's just a problem with how things happened at the time.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's like the being where I am right now, it's like the complete unknown of what's going to come out of it. But I can look back to when I worked as a veterinarian, and like I I did that so much and I knew it so well that I literally knew what was wrong with every pet before I even saw it. Like, and
Yeah.
and there's some difficulty with that, because then you go in with kind of a skewed perspective. So I'd always have to
Yeah.
check myself at the door. But like, you know, it's the complete opposite, but it's also, we're talking about seasons, and so like these are both seasons
Yeah.
in life and in the pursuits that we go through, because on the one hand there's a complete unknown, and then on the other hand there's a complete known, and you have all the different shades in between there. And it's
Yeah.
really like finding where you are and accepting where you are, because this too shall pass. It's a season. After spring comes
Yeah.
summer, and then fall, and then back to another winter. So like as good as things may be, they may last, they may not last.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I like that. I like the analogy too, or the metaphor, because Nietzsche he talks a lot about too, like daylight, right, and nighttime. So like being in the dark, not knowing, high noon being like clarity, right, and then you have like the morning and nighttime, that dusk period where it's like kind of unclear. You're just still like muddling through. And I think a lot of the reality too is just life is that in a sense too. It's also kind of muddling through and then coming up with an explanation later. And if we can kind of know at least the direction we're going in, that's often just enough. We don't need much else. You just got to keep going. You work with it and be adaptable to the situations. Be willing to change yourself or to change what you're doing as you meet new things down the road. I think that's crucial. It's hard to do in the moment and to think of it. And you're right. Like, in that, if you're in a period of like a winter where it's like, the light's short, it's not always easy to see. Things seem kind of desolate. You're in that middle area. It's like reminding yourself that it'll still change. It always changes. That's always part of this process. It just takes time. You just got to kind of let it happen at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Maybe it is that the urge to force things. It's almost like we want to force things to be a certain way, right?
that is a good point, because like we talk about seasons here, but seasons take a while. They take 3 months. And like
Yeah.
most of the stuff that people go through, it really doesn't last 3 months. Like most of the difficult times, they don't really last much longer than 3 months. They're like a season.
Yeah, they really are. Oh, that's a good. Yeah, it works out well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I also find too, I think it's the ones that we come back to most often are also difficult. It's like if you've experienced anxiety in your life or even depression, right? When it comes up again and again over time with related to the same things, it's hard because it's like each time it's like a reminder. You might be better at dealing with it, but it's also like, I'm not over that yet. I haven't yet gotten through this season or this time. So it's still going to happen. And I think sometimes we also have that expectation that like, you feel good one day and you're like, oh, I'm done it. I'm good. I can move on. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
so you could kind of sign, you don't prepare yourself in a way, right? For the sort of dangers of feeling bad again. And I think that's the other side of it that's funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do always laugh how like your total perspective on life 100% depends on how you're feeling that moment.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, we joke with ourselves that we think we're rational beings, but like literally
People
your
are
whole
not,
entire life
not even a little
perspective.
bit.
Yeah. And it's so funny because like especially with technology, like it can change in an instant. Like you could be feeling, you know, having the best morning ever, and then you look at your phone and you get some message, and all of a sudden, boom, done. And yeah.
Well, and it's so true. And it's the funny part, it's like we were talking about before, waking up and being like, I'm ready for the day, like almost like trying to convince yourself you're positive, optimistic, energetic, because 90% of the time that's all it takes. And it is like we act like we're these super rational beings, but the reality is we're not. We're more influenced by our feelings, by our emotional state than anything else. And we can use reason to kind of help us through it, but it's not always the best mechanism.
Dude, I always like every day I have like
Yeah,
so much
it's funny.
anxiety about looking at my phone because my mornings are, I love my mornings. It's like perfect. I wake up, make some
Yeah.
coffee, I read, I journal, I listen to some good stuff. And it's like, like every morning, it's just awesome. And then like I fear that moment of getting down to work and looking at my phone
Yeah.
and just like because I'm like, oh, what did somebody put on my plate this morning? What's going to come up
Yeah.
today? Oh, geez.
Well, you can't even avoid it too, though. It's like you go on, like I try to selectively go on to do certain things, and it's like you can't avoid the crappy news and the stuff that happens in the world. You just can't anymore. It's impossible. Like you check your email and you'll get an ad like, "Oh, this happened. This government's falling apart or something." It's like, let's give you some terrible news. Maybe you'll read more. Yeah, it's funny. How long do you spend in the morning without checking your phone? What's your usual like timeline
Dude,
before you
three
actually bother to
hours.
check it?
3
That's
hours.
good.
Yeah, because I just
Yeah.
that's like my time. I wake up about 3 hours before I need to do anything. So I can do reading, journaling, exercise, all this stuff, just enjoy the look out the window, enjoy all that stuff. And it's like sometimes it's tough because I listen to music from my phone. And so I see all the
Yeah.
notifications there. And
Yeah.
and I'm like, I don't want to look at those.
Don't do it.
And like they can even be good stuff, but it's just like every once in a while, there's just like one of those things where I'm having a perfectly good day and I'm like, okay, let's look at the notifications. It's just like, why did I do that? Just ruin my day.
You
There
know,
we
it
go.
is too, though, even when they're good too, everyone pulls you in. It sucks you into checking something, which invariably will lead to something negative. It's funny you say that too, because I really think people do underestimate the importance of having time in the morning, that you just get these things done. Whatever it is. Like, for me, I usually get it myself about an hour and a half, 2 hours before I actually bother with my phone. Because I hang out with my dog, take him for a walk, I do some journaling stuff, do stuff like that early. And I like that time in the morning. It's always the best time. And it's funny because it's funny you mentioned that, because I always find every day, it's like when I feel like I'm in that middle period, in that winter period, it's always later in the day that I know it. It's like the mornings are usually fine. It's usually like sometime around like 1 or 2 or 3 in the afternoon that I start to feel it happening, which I find interesting, because I can't tell if it's just like, see, it might be a consequence of like, the work I'm doing. It might be checking things. It might be like responding to, negativity that's out there. I don't know what it is, but like, and I mean, I'm actively making changes. So it could be related to work and stuff like that, and being kind of unhappy with that, which I am in some aspects of things that I'm doing, so that's probably part of it, I imagine. But it's that funny thing where for me, it usually is later in the day that it happens. I notice it.
Well, that's actually a really good observation, because if you know that it's happening, then potentially you could try and look for some causes and institute some preventative measures.
Ooh,
You
said
know,
very nicely. Yeah.
like for instance,
I
this is just what comes
yeah.
to mind. So like, let's say like every day around 2 or 3 o'clock, you end up just feeling like garbage. So instead of taking a full hour eating lunch or doing whatever there, you can eat lunch in 10 minutes and then go for a walk every day and try and observe something new that you haven't seen that day. That's just like,
It's funny, I'm laughing because I started doing actually walks now around, usually between like depending on how I feel, between like 11 and like 2, I'll do a walk. And like it does help a lot. Getting out helps a ton. And I think, I think one of the biggest things is identifying it, just being aware that you feel that way, and then you can actually do something. But I like that idea of preventative too, because trying to sort of plan to prevent these things from even happening, or being prepared for it so you have tools to use, is a good idea.
yeah.
But it's funny, I've been trying to be more aware of it. And I even thought about writing down too when these things happen, to try and get a better sense of like, because it's sometimes that's the other part of it. It's just hard sometimes to figure out what the hell you're responding to. Because I've noticed that myself, like, your days are kind of like, most of our days are every day is different, but they're also kind of consistent in the broad picture. And it's like trying to figure out what the hell it is sometimes is not easy. It's like a very difficult thing to kind of locate
Mm-hmm.
and get
Yeah.
specific about.
Yeah, but I like when you can get to the point when you observe it, because for me, like every once in a while, anxiety was like creeping up on me. Like I didn't
Oh yeah.
realize it, and it would like creep up on me, and but then I started observing it more, and now it creeps up, and I'm like, oh, there it is. Like all of a sudden, I start feeling
Yeah.
uncomfortable. I'm like, I got to change something. Like, what's going on? I
Yeah.
got, well, I start like contemplating about changing my whole entire life, and then I'm like, oh, there it is again.
Well, it's funny. It's like, what I think it was Camus that said, like, even the most crushing truth is overcome by being acknowledged, something along those lines, right? That like once you acknowledge something, you've kind of taken the power away. It's mostly these things that we don't acknowledge or try to deny that actually causes the most harm. So like once you admit that I feel anxious, I should do something, like you take control rather than letting those things control you. And it's funny because like, I was thinking about this the other day in relation to it, it's so funny because like the existentialists and the Stoics, it's really, their program for dealing with this, I think, is fairly similar, right? It's being honest with yourself, being aware, you know, and really focusing on what you can control, because that gives you back that feeling of strength and agency that you're losing in these moments when your emotions go wild or when you feel anxious or depressed, right? It's like it almost feels like, I mean, I don't know about you, but like when I feel anxious or depressed or something, or even in that middle period, it almost feels like the external is like somehow making me feel that way, even though it's not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I think
definitely.
I think learning how to sort of identify and be honest, it's hard. It is hard. And it takes constant reminding, yourself, going
It's
back over it.
it's a skill, and it's kind of like a game. Like we're talking about seasons, and so like with seasons, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so like for instance, when these things come up, That's the middle of it. See if you can identify the beginning of it. Like, when did it start? How did it start? All that stuff. And then see if you can be present for it through to the end. Because you know it's going to end. Can you actually be present with it until the end? Because like
that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like I remember I used to go to all these like meditation retreats, and a lot of people think that like meditating is about being peaceful and all this stuff, but it's not. It's about being present
Not
with
really.
whatever comes up. And eventually, once you're present with whatever comes up, then you get the like the side effect is being peaceful. But like really, a lot of times in meditation, it's just like uncomfortable, terror, fear, anxiety, all this stuff, and just having the gall to be present while it's there.
No, it's that developing that awareness of it, right, in the moment of what's going on, so you can then address it later and figure out what you need to do to work it out. And I think that's probably one of our biggest faults, is that we aren't really, we tend not to be very self-aware. We tend to try, and the second something happens where we feel uncomfortable, we tend to try and deny it, or distract ourselves, or look for a way to not feel that way, rather than actually asking ourselves, why do we feel this way? And I think, at that point too, about seasons, everything changes. So keeping that in mind, it's not a permanent state. You're not going to be like that forever. So it's a way to kind of help you kind of embrace it maybe, and sit with it to figure it out. It's a good application to everything too. Everything does happen in that sort of fashion, right? There's always a beginning, middle, and end. There's always sort of a transitional period, and it's finding those and trying to identify that really helps us, I think.
Yeah, but like talking about seasons, okay, so we have birth, life, and death. And this is something that I think about all the time, because it's like, man, like we literally have this short little period of time when we're actually here on this planet. Like everybody makes a big hubbub about Trump and Elon Musk and all this stuff, and I'm just thinking like 100 years, everyone's going to be dead. It's like a whole new group of people. And so like at the same time, I'm like, man, this 100 years, like this is a short season. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah. No, it's fun. It's I was actually just listening to something this morning on climate change, and they're like, why don't people, pay attention? I was like, because, you're talking 80 years or 100 years. Most people, it's like, that's so out of their realm of, grasping, because they have this short life and they have the worries in their own short life now. And that's what makes it so hard to look at these long-term things, I think, and especially when they're really for others later than you, not for, now. And it's kind of funny. It's like a distorted perspective, right? But you're right. We have this short time, am I living it in a way that's valuable and useful for me? Or am I letting these things actually diminish the value of that life? It is a short time. Everything's just constant change. It's funny. It's like that desire we have, for trying to make things permanent and make things the same. We want things simple. We want to always feel good, right? We want our neighborhood to always look the same. We want things to always be similar, rather than embracing the other side of it, which is the change that is life, right? The change that is all around us, and kind of embracing that, because that also means we can do other things. We're not stuck just however we are.
Yeah. So when you mention the topic of like kind of being in the middle, being stuck with something, is there a particular instance that you're going through?
Yeah, I was thinking more like, in terms of like, I've been doing a lot in terms of like trying to, get to the place that I want to be. And I think, a lot of it right now is probably, I feel more in the middle in relation to like trying to transition when I'm doing work-wise and stuff, to develop different, both skills, but also just, direct my energies in different areas. But, you still need health insurance and stuff. You still, you still need to make money. So it's like that side of it where I sometimes feel stuck. It's like, well, I still need insurance and stuff and all this. And it's like, I kind of feel like I'm in that middle period where I know that I'm going to make a breakthrough sooner or later, but it's like that in between just sucks. It's like because you still have to keep going. You still have to keep doing the things you don't necessarily. And it's not that I hate what I'm doing. It's just that I just don't particularly want to do it forever. So it's like also wanting to, get through that. I think it's mostly that is what I've been experiencing recently. It's more like this feeling in between, like where I am now and where I want to be. And I know that the change is going to happen soon, but it's like getting there, it's like, and it's that problem of, not knowing exactly also how, we don't have I don't have a crystal ball that tells me exactly how long it's going to take. It's one thing to know, like, oh, in a year and a half, boom, that'll be that, right? And it's like, okay, I can make a year and a half. But if it's like, well, it could be 3 years, it could be 2 months, it could be, and you don't know. And I think that's part of it too.
Mm-hmm. So you're in the middle now. Do you know what the beginning was?
That's a good question.
Because I mean,
Not,
we're both kind of in the same area where we both
yeah.
kind of are undergoing change. And like me personally, I've always been one who loves learning. Like there's,
Yeah.
there's the saying, the more you learn, the more you earn. And any saying that rhymes has got to be true. So
Oh, it always is. Yeah.
yeah. So like, I just think that computers are the way for me, because we talk about in our short episode, like finding your strengths. And computers is something that I was always good at. Like whenever people had problems with
Yeah.
computers, they'd always come to me. And it's just like unnaturally easy. And so, but I also remember like the beginning, the reason for the change was because I was in a profession that I could not stand. Like just
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
like working as a veterinarian, everybody's like, oh, but that's the best job ever. And it's like, really, killing one animal a day is the best job ever. Like
Yeah.
I mean, for some people they're like, but you're doing them a good service. And I was like, yeah, but I just can't get down with that. Like that's not cool. I'm not okay killing animals. And but
Yeah.
it's like, as a veterinarian, that's part of your job. You're supposed to guide the transition. And like I've euthanized thousands of animals because I worked in emergency hospitals to help pay off debt. And so like that was the beginning that said like, okay, whatever I have to do to not do this, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think for me, it probably would have been about like, it was definitely like at least 5 years or so ago. It was like that recognition that like, as a college professor, like the recognition that the education system's totally effed. It's going in the wrong direction. The way they're teaching classes and hiring, the job market's terrible. Like, and also too, just like the way that like the changes, it's such an antiquated system, and the way publication is in academia just started to get to me more. I just knew that's when I probably noticed it the most, but I think it was always there. The recognition that like we're not doing things the right way to help people, that this is not, and I don't want to necessarily be a part of it. You know what I mean? And I think that's probably the start for me, is that realization. But I don't know exactly when it started, because I think that's something that it builds. Like it's something I
Mhm.
was kind of always aware of, being just not 100% aware of.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's funny,
yeah,
but it's helpful knowing that too, because it's like when I think sometimes too, looking at the beginning too, it's like you realize like, well, that was a slow process, so there is still, I have so much time still to change things, and it's like I think it's maybe I think it's also just to that momentary worry, you know what I mean, of like you get kind of like distraught, and you're like, oh, this will never happen, but then you get kind of move on. I guess I don't know how to explain it. You know what I mean?
see,
Like where you feel like,
no, I'm like the same. I'm the same area as you, I think, because like I have these things too. Like, what happens if I put in all this effort and nothing comes of it? And then I remind myself,
yeah,
well, I'm still gonna die. So like
yeah,
I might as well at least have tried to do something that I was really passionate about and enjoyed, and like felt that I was gifted in. I might as well at least try to do that, because why the heck not? Like I think it would be one of the most terrible things to die and not do the thing I was really meant to do. And it would be even
yeah,
worse than that to be stuck somewhere that I can't stand. Like that was
yeah.
just the worst. I
It's
remember,
funny you mentioned that, because that existential idea of like, that death is the end, like that always helps me out a lot of times, because it's like, oh shit, yeah, it's like, well, what else am I going to do? It doesn't really matter anyway. I might as well do what I want to do and see what happens.
mhm,
Just go with it.
yeah. But like we
Yeah,
talked earlier about pain and all that stuff, how people try and avoid it. But like pain can be a great motivator. Like I remember
yeah,
when
can.
I used to work in the emergency clinic, because I was at the emergency clinic. You're there, but you're the only doctor there. You're there with a few nurses. You're the only doctor there. And
Oh yeah.
for me, that was like, I started doing that my year out of school. And like in school, they don't teach you anything useful. And
No,
so like
no.
all of these things, all of the nurses knew much more than I did. And like thankfully they were there to help me. But like I remember like driving there in just sheer terror about what was going to happen. Like, am I going to have to do these new surgeries that I've never done before? uh, what's going to happen? And just like the pain of that, and just dealing with euthanizing animals, it was just like, I don't care what it is, but anything, it's worthwhile to get out of this.
Yeah, I know. I think that's true. That's a good way to look at it. I mean, I think that way all the time too. It's like, it doesn't really matter what it is. I just got to get out of it. And remembering that too, I think with this, there's always going to be that spring and there's always going to be that summer. And, the spring's going to be awesome and great and a new beginning. And then, you'll hit plateaus no matter what you do. I think it's true. But I like that thinking. I think that's true. We just got to remind ourselves that we have this one shot. We might as well do what we can, because otherwise, what's the point? People always ask for the meaning of life and the point of life, and I really think that's it. I think it's just trying to do the best you can with what you have, and not regretting, especially, regretting not having made a choice that you should have made, or at least tried, not taking chances on yourself, and that could really, make all the difference. Because I think that's one of the biggest things we do is we put these blocks in front of ourselves, really, so we don't change anything, and that's worse than everything else.
It really is a mind mess. Like, we think that there are these limitations that other people are putting on us, and like, sure, society has its limitations, but you always find an example of somebody who broke through it anyways.
It's funny too. It's always finding a way to work within the system to get what you want, right? And 90% of the time that's just taking chances and trying. And they might not all work. A lot of times it's going to fail a bunch of times. But you'll find that one that does break you through, and that's all you need.
All you need is one home run. That's literally it. Like, I've heard that for so long, and it's so true. All you need is one home run.
Yeah. And all you need to do is find that one thing that you really love, and boom, you're good. It's like you don't need to worry about anything else. It's worth it to keep trying. I think that's always my biggest fear, is like being just stuck in that middle. Like, you see so many people where they're just doing something they hate doing, and it's like that just wears you down. And I don't see the point of that.
Yeah, a lot of people get stuck in like the why me mentality.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, well, like, that's part of this. Jim Rohn, he always talks about that. He's
why
like,
not me?
Yeah, why not me? Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, he always talks about the mentality of like, don't ask that question. It's like, it's not useful for anything to ask that question. Just like, realize that it happens, and then it's a season. Well,
I think you're right. I think that's the truth, right? It's just, don't ask those types of questions. Don't fret on that stuff. Focus on what you can do. Focus on making those changes, because that's all that matters. It's going to pass.
But life's not fair. And it's like, life isn't fair. But figure out how to make it unfair in your advantage. Like, that's the whole key. It's not fair. It's completely off balance, but get into that off balance where it works in your favor.
Yeah. At least it's good, right? I like that.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
So life has seasons.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do.
It does have seasons.
Yeah. I think that, like, because for people who are just kind of like stuck in the rut, or like life isn't working out for them exactly how they want, and they just hear what we're saying, and they're like, that's a crock of BS, you woohoo, woo woo, like all of that stuff. I mean, sometimes life sucks. There's no way around it. Like, there literally isn't. But there are some things that you can do just to help yourself out immediately. And so, like, if you're ever in a situation where you're going to do something drastic, call a suicide prevention hotline, reach out to a counselor, reach out to a trusted friend, and like a good friend, not somebody who, you just go out to the bar with every day, but like somebody who you can really talk with. Get out into nature, move your body, and remember, it's just a season.
That's true. It is a season. It'll always pass. And I think, trying to be more self-aware, focusing on like the little good things, and remembering that it's also like a season. It's like your perspective, right? Sometimes all you need is to change your perspective on it. And I know that sounds easy, and it's not easy. A lot of times it's very difficult, but like everything else, it changes. I like that. That's good advice and helpful for me. Thank you. Always good to talk about things that are relevant, right?
Dude, helpful for me too. We're always in the same spot.
It always is. Well, what? That's what I love about it too. Is I think people don't realize like how often we're all just in the same goddamn situation. Like, we pretend like it's different, but it's really not. It's all the fucking same. It's so funny.
I literally was having like a crisis walking down the street today, because I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? Like, this is crazy. I don't know where I'm going. Yeah.
It's always the same. That's good. That's episode 57. Seasons life, everything changes. Don't stress. Stick with it. Be aware and keep moving forward. Do what's right for you. Thank you guys for checking us out and watching. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to all that. It helps us out a lot. Check out our quick fix midweek, and we will be back next week with another quick fix and another full length episode. Until then, though, later, Randy.
Later, Danny.